Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 140 of the podcast. In this episode, I talk with Beth Guckenberger, and we talk all about Back2Back Ministries, how that got started, how it has grown tremendously just in the last 6 years or so. And it's just a great story. If you're like me and you've heard Beth speak at a conference or something like that, you know she just has this amazing ability to tell stories and draw you in and communicate God's word and the gospel in such a clear and powerful way. And most of that comes from, I think, the work that she's done with Back2Back and her relationship with God. It just comes out. We kind of dive into that, even though that wasn't the point of the interview. We really just want to talk about Back2Back, the history there, and how parents and leaders can talk about missions with their kids and help kids have a heart for the nations. But as we do that, we kind of wrap up some of that talk. I do ask her, how does she teach when she gets on stage at a conference? It's a different kind of style, certainly a storytelling kind of style. Looks like she could do it with almost no notes, and she kind of explains that. So it was just fun to ask that question. Hadn't prepared to do that. And I enjoyed listening to her talk about what that looks like for her, kind of behind the scenes of how she prepares and teaches and is helping others do that too, which is pretty cool. Before we jump into the interview, though, I want to let you know that I don't know about you, but like our church wants to train volunteers better. One of the things we embraced a couple of years ago is training volunteers online, meaning, we're not just training volunteers online, but adding online and methods like that as another way to train volunteers. So we do onboarding with volunteers. We do trainings throughout the year for sure. But to add to that, we got a subscription to Trained Up, which is an online platform that helps you train your volunteers, on demand, online, on their own time. And you kind of build the courses or the tracks, and then they take those and you can, remind them. It's a great system that does all that stuff. And I just want to let you know, and this has been true for a long time, but I don't think I've talked about it on the podcast, as a part of Ministry Boost and our partnership with Trained Up, you can get Trained Up at a discount, 10% off for life. Just go to ministryboost.org/trained up. And then if you sign up for a subscription like my church has, then use the code BOOST10, BOOST10, BOOST10 to get 10% off for life. You'll love that platform. And in the next week, I'll probably share with you something that'll be helpful for free if you want to use that to help learn how you can train your volunteers online and take advantage of something like Trained Up and all of that. As usual, you can get the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 140. But let's go ahead now and jump into my conversation with Beth about Back2Back Ministries, helping kids have a heart for the nations, and how she teaches and how she prepares to teach at conferences and church and all of those things. Let's listen in. Well, today I get the privilege of having Beth Guckenberger on the podcast. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So for anyone who isn't maybe familiar with you and your story and even the work you all do at Back2Back, tell us about yourself and your family, which is a big family, and the work you do with Back2Back.
Absolutely. My husband and I are the co-executive directors of an orphan care organization called Back2Back Ministries. So we're located in lots of countries around the world: Nigeria, India, Haiti, Mexico, different places around the world. And we've been doing that work a little over 22 years. We've kind of grown up alongside of it. In the beginning, it was just the two of us. Today, there's about 300 employees. So that process has given us lots of ample opportunity for growth and development. My family is, large and complicated. We have 10 children officially, really a couple more than that. But we have 4 teenage sons. They're 15, 16, 18, and 20. And then 6 girls that start at age 20. Our youngest daughter will be 21 here coming up. And she was born the first year we moved to Mexico, where we lived for 15 years. And then we have twin girls that we adopted. They're 32, and they have both made me a grandma. So we have, wow. Yeah, it's an active little family and household. And they all have, some of them have plus ones, and some of them want plus ones, and some of them have friends that have come to rest under our tree. So yeah, it's a happening joint at our house.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I mean, kudos to knowing a lot of those ages, right? Like I have 3 kids and like right now what helps me is they're 3 years apart. So, for a lot of the time it's pretty simple, but, yeah, I'm sure it gets complicated there. That's awesome.
There's always someone to do something with. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's great. And being a young grandma, that's got to be kind of fun.
It is really fun. People in the beginning were like, do you feel like a grandma? And I'm like, well, I'm always taking her picture and trying to spend money on her. So I think that's a good sign.
So there you go. That's the qualities. Yeah.
I think that feels pretty grandparent-like, but
it does. But maybe with more energy, maybe that's what, maybe
definitely
the energy, but and you can do all the grandma things. That's awesome.
Yes, it is very fun.
So how many years ago too, how did Back2Back get started and how many years has it been? And then, I'd love to hear like what it's like today, because obviously, like you said, it's you two, and then now it's 300 people. I mean, that's a lot of growth there. But how did it start?
So my husband and I were teachers, and we had the summers off as a result of our jobs, and we were volunteering in our local church just with children and family ministries. And the youth pastor at the church said, "Would you be willing to take kids on a mission trip?" He knew that we had the discretionary time, and we had traveled overseas in college with a ministry called Crew a couple different times. And so we said, sure. So we took kids on mission trips like the summers of 93, 4, 5, 6, those summers, just local area kids. And the summer of 1996, we were partnering with a church in a city called Querétaro, Mexico. And we were painting a wall, their exterior perimeter wall, from blue to green as they asked us to. But the problem was the year before we painted it from, green to blue. And I realized they were just trying to keep us busy. They weren't really showing us what God was doing or how we could join him in that. And so I was complaining about it a little bit to my husband, who was in charge of the paint project. And he said to me, do you think there are any orphanages in this city? And I had no idea, but we had been to an orphanage with Crew a couple years prior to that in the country of Albania. And it had made an impression on us. So I was like, I don't know, but let's go find out. So we left our students, but in the hands of very responsible adults. And then we just jumped into a taxi cab, and I just started to say the word orphan with a Spanish accent, like el orfano, el orfanatorio, el orfanagorio. Like what do you understand what I'm trying to say? And finally the cab driver did understand what I was trying to say. And he, dropped us off at an orphanage. And I looked at my husband like, do you even know the name of the street that church is on? And do we have enough pesos to pay to somebody to take us back? And if these people answer the door, are we going to even know what to say to them? And we should have been, as many other listeners know, in a moment where we were in over our heads, we were ill-equipped, underprepared, immature. Like we should not have felt okay about what was going on. But the truth was, God gave us this gift. The Bible calls a peace that passes understanding, this like total sense of like, this is exactly where I want you. And so we knocked on the door, and through some creative conversation, we said to these people, we have 3 things in our hand. We have $200 US. We have 20 able-bodied high school kids and 1 complete day on our trip. And if you had access to those resources, what would you do with them? And really, that's how all ministry starts. You just figure out what you have in your hand and who it is that you want to reach out to, and then just bridge them in the name of Jesus. And so he told us the kids hadn't had meat in over a year, and the front windows were broken. So the next day, that's what we worked on, the windows, and we brought enough meat we thought would last them for a whole month. But after my husband Todd finished with the windows, he was watching me over at the grill, and he eventually came over and pointed out this little 4-year-old to me. He's like, did you see this little girl? And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't keep my eyes off her. She's the cutest thing I've ever seen. And he said, well, you took your eyes off of her a few times because she's like taking 5 hamburgers off your table. And I don't know any 4-year-old that can eat that much. And you better follow her and figure out where it's all going. And so anyway, eventually I followed her when she came up for another one, and she led me back to her dorm room. And there I could see that her and her friends were helping each other lift up their mattresses, and they were sticking those burgers underneath them. And that was the moment that we say it kind of all started. We just stood in that doorway and thought about all the people we knew who would buy a hamburger for an orphan if they only knew how to get it to them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's an awesome story. And what is it? I mean, in how many years has it been now that it's been in existence? And what is it like today with 300 staff? I mean, in all over the world.
Yeah. So that we went back to Cincinnati after our mission trip that week. That's our hometown. And we decided we had more money than we needed. We had 2 incomes and no children yet. So that whole next school year, we lived off of just one of our salaries, and the other salary we put in a bank account. And at the end of that school year, which would have been the summer of 97, we decided to move to Mexico on that savings account and try to learn the language and build some relationships and understand the culture of her child and maybe start a foundation and just all the things. We thought, surely you could do all that in a year. So Back2Back officially began its orphan care work in July of 1997. That's when we moved there. And we ended up living for 15 years there. And it became this realization that God didn't actually need me to serve the orphan. He'd been loving on the orphan for a very long time. I just needed to put myself in a place where I could be a vessel of the stuff he was already passionate about, already working on. I'm just looking for willing people. So when we stood inside of that sweet spot, it was like, I'm never leaving this. This feels really good. So we started in Monterrey, Mexico, then began to expand into other countries and other places around Mexico. And, in the beginning, all we did was just meet physical needs because that's all we could see. Like, these kids need protein and vaccinations and screens on their windows and bedding. But over time, we realized that physical needs alone aren't really, it wasn't making enough of a difference. So we added to the physical and obviously the spiritual aspect of the ministry an educational component where we began to take orphans all the way through their bachelor's degrees, which was pretty radical to us at the time. That felt crazy. Only at that point in Mexico, only 8% of the population was college educated. So to take so many kids so far. But that actually wasn't the secret sauce. We were doing that for a number of years, and we realized we weren't addressing adequately the trauma that they had experienced and some of the emotional healing that they needed. So they were graduating, but not being able to keep jobs, not sustaining meaningful relationships. There was more work to be done that was in the heart level, that was beyond some of the spiritual programming that we had already had. It was really needed to be more transformational. So anyway, today we call what we do the 5-point child development plan, which is meeting needs physically, spiritually, educationally, emotionally, and socially. And we do that with kids from hard places.
That's awesome. And 300 employees. I mean, that's obviously a lot of growth. And what does that work look like all over the world in different ways?
Yeah.
Is it very similar, just in different locations?
It is. I mean, it's got some different cultural iterations. In the beginning, of course, we just loved the orphan in isolation. But over time, you can't love the orphan without loving their, at-risk mom and their incarcerated dad or their, all the different pockets of relationships that fit around that orphan community. So we began to do things like community centers and what we call a strong families program, which is strengthening children and their families before they become orphaned. We do foster care, all kinds of work, all within the orphan. But yeah, there's a story I sometimes tell about. In 2012, my husband and I were going to give a breakout session at an orphan summit that meets once a year. Everybody in this field gets together basically once a year. And the breakout was titled How to Take Your Startup Nonprofit to a Mid-Size Organization. So we had about 100 employees at that point, about a $5 million budget. And the process of going from 2 people to 100 and our little salary of a teaching year to $5 million, it was pretty full of challenges. Like, how do you do international audits, and how do you do, HR policies, and how do you do board governance, and like all the work that comes with leadership development and organizational development. We just were like learning everything in real time. And so we thought, well, some of the people that mentored us and helped us with that part, they were from the for-profit world. Most of the ministries that we knocked on their door and asked for help either wanted to charge us for their help or they were too busy for us. So we ended up getting most of our training and teaching and mentoring from people that were in the for-profit world. And then we took their project management or their, whatever it is, strategic planning, whatever it is they were teaching us about, put it through our spirit-filled nonprofit grid. And we decided we were going to do a little breakout and share with everybody, here are the tools that we've used. And we made 20 copies. We thought if 10 organizations came, that would be a huge win. We opened the door and over 400 different organizations walked through the door, and we were totally overwhelmed. And we stood on the stage and said, we have got to collaborate. There's 163 million orphans in the world. And if we have to work together. That's how this is going to work. So anything we've ever made, any Bible study, any training, any policy, anything that we've ever made, any of you can have for free. Just take our logo off it and put yours on it. And maybe it's not exactly what you want, but it'll get you halfway down that road, less time in front of a computer, more time in front of a kid. Like, this is a win for the kingdom. And I always say that you can trace an anointing on our organization back to that May of 2012. Something happened that day. We decided to open our hands like that and share with one another. Of course, you can't outgive God. So every time we open to share with someone about how we do child sponsorship or how we do mission trips or how we do onboarding or whatever, our hands got full with the things that we were exchanging with organizations. They were telling us about how they do things, and all that just makes everyone better. But we've way more than doubled since then. And I think that there is something that God honors about open-handed sharing. So it was a fun lesson for us to have to learn kind of in real time.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of, like, people at Life Church will say the same thing about, when they've given away so much stuff and YouVersion and everything I know that that's part of their culture, that even beyond YouVersion and everything else, they just want to give it away. And they feel like they need to, that's sort of almost like an agreement with God that, like,
yes,
they'll bless the church, but you have to give it away. And it sounds like you've had that similar experience, which is awesome. And I'm sure that's been a lot of help to other organizations, because it is great to not start from scratch, to take something from back to back and it's 80% of what you need is a huge help.
Yeah.
So what does it look like I want to talk about how parents and church leaders can talk to kids about missions and all that. But before I do that, practically, what does it look like for a person or a church to engage with Back to Back and help?
Yeah, there's a lot of different places, kind of on-ramps. I was feeling like a while back that if you wanted to get in orphan care, the message was kind of extreme. Like, you've got to adopt a bunch of kids and they better be special needs, or you've got to sell everything you have and move to Africa. And there wasn't a lot of easy on-ramps for people to say, I have a heart for orphans, but this is my day job, or this is the practicalities of my life, and I can't maybe do some of the things you're asking, so therefore I'm going to do nothing. So we've definitely tried to create some places that feel easy for folks to get their big toe into the world. And probably the simplest way is through child sponsorship. That's a really easy way. I always say, especially to parents, that kids are not impressed by a cause. The cause is, but they definitely are moved by people. Like, relationship is what motivates us to do things like sacrifice and grow and learn and lean in. And so introducing a child or a classroom of children or a family to a child through sponsorship is just a really great way to make a big size problem seem more relatable. And sponsorship dollars, no matter what organization you sponsor through. Of course, we love Back to Back, but we have many, many good friends in this field, and there are a lot of people doing great things with sponsorship. That provides programming dollars that pay, national social workers and psychologists to do counseling and home visits. It pays for food. It pays school bills. It pays all kinds of things that are just really practical. So that's the easy one, is through child sponsorship. Mm-hmm. Not every organization does this, but we highly encourage kids to come on mission trips. So we have family-based mission trips, which is really, it begins to really alter a family DNA when they come and serve together. Not everybody has the finances to do that or the freedom in their jobs to do it. But when you get a chance, if that is someone listening, then family mission trips are a really powerful way to see the best in each other. It's a really powerful way to discover what God may have, like a part of his heart he's broken off and deposited into your child. You'll see things like generosity and empathy and service. And so I love it. I love to take kids on a mission trip. Just in a really practical thing for your listeners, basically the government doesn't allow a tax deduction for a child under the age of 8. So most organizations will have, for those of us that do allow kids to come on trips, we have written policies that say that kids can't come on a mission trip if they're under the age of 8. But that's just something we have to do to comply with the IRS. If you're willing if you're willing to not have a tax deduction for your child, then we basically say over the age of 4. So if you have, you have a 10 and a 7-year-old and you don't want to leave a 7-year-old at home, don't bring them. We'll figure out a way to work within the system that we have. So that's a really easy way to do it. Then there's all the myriad of ways that kids can do different projects in their communities and with their soccer team and their Sunday school classes and their cousins. I have just gobs of examples. I just this week got a call from a family who had their kids who were pretty little, like 4 and 6 and 8. They gave them a whole bunch of seeds. So that was the initial investment, is they bought some packets of seeds, and the kids planted the seeds and took care of the plants until they grew up. Then they put those little plants into tiny flower pots, and they sold them at church. And they sent us a pretty sizable check for a 4, 6, and 8-year-old from their plant sale. And those kids had a lot of satisfaction really watching that process, and then coming and making sure that we knew how they wanted those dollars spent for kids around the world. And we have lots and lots of service opportunities. That's an easy thing. If people who are listening are thinking, I want some creative ideas of ways kids can get involved, then Nick, you can share my email at the end, and I have a whole list of things we've seen happen. I'd be happy to share.
Yeah, and I mean, those are a couple examples right there, but that was definitely one of the questions I had, which was like, how can a parent, and I'm even thinking about myself, talk to their kids about missions and have a heart for orphans and for the nations and all that?
Yeah, I think that a couple things that we've done wrong historically when talking to kids about missions is we typically find ourselves just not knowing, and so we talk about what man isn't doing, when instead I think it's much better to talk about what God is doing. So the way that breaks down is we can talk about, the way governments are failing and the way, show pictures to our children of babies with big bellies and flies on their faces. But that doesn't usually captivate anybody. That could scare kids. That could make them feel things like shame or guilt or fear. Instead, we want them to feel excited, intrigued, fascinated, swept up in, like, what does God do about what's going on around the world? How is he meeting kids that are just like me? So I like to tell true stories about kids around the world. I wrote 5 books full of just true little stories about ways in which God has, met kids in the different countries that we serve, and things like clean water and child slavery and orphan care and some of the different ways in which children are impacted. So whether you get on YouTube to find a video about stuff, or whether you check out of your library or buy books, I think there is not a lot, but there is growing some material to teach kids about missions. Because again, I think we can err on being cheesy, like some cheesy material out there, or guilt-ridden. And neither of those are going to really sustain or captivate a kid's attention for the long haul. So I'm a firm believer in stories. Yeah.
And the books you're talking about, they're all tales of, right? That's kind of the common denominator, tales of the not forgotten tales. So tell us real, quick about that too, for anybody that might be interested.
Yeah, it started when I was beginning to see the impact of family mission trips. And I was realizing that the real fruit of the mission trip was happening the week that everybody got back, and kids were telling stories to their friends, and they were all together as a family, realizing they had learned simultaneously some good lessons that they could now build off of together. And I was feeling for families who didn't have that freedom or flexibility to have an experience like that. So I was trying to figure out how I could tell the kinds of stories that a family could read in their bedrooms in Oregon or in Tennessee and still be able to have those same kind of conversations of substance, because we didn't become parents to do homework and go to soccer practice. We became parents to disciple and influence the next generation. And so I was trying to figure out some catalyst content that would allow parents to have those conversations of substance. So yeah, the Tales books all are written on a different promise that God has for orphans. So there's Tales of the Not Forgotten, because he promises to not forget them, and Tales of the Defended Ones, because he promises to defend them, and Tales of the Ones he won't let go, because he promises he won't let them go. And yeah, there's 5 of them. And be happy to share those with anybody.
Yeah, we'll put links to them in the show notes too, so people can just click there and get that. Most people listening obviously are church leaders, probably leading in children's ministry, student ministry, next gen, something like that. And what would you say to them in terms of how they could like equip parents in their church to talk to their kids about having missions or volunteers? You know, how could you help them bring this to the forefront in their church and their ministry?
Yeah, I mean, I mainly, these are the things I always say. Find out what your church is already passionate about in mission wise, because we hope that your children grow up and serve in your church one day on mission boards and in those capacities. So if you're a church that's passionate about church planting, or you're passionate about clean water or whatever, like figuring out what your church's missional DNA is and how you can partner is the best. In the absence of your church having a direction that feels good to you, I mean, certainly I always offer up Back2Back and orphan care. I think that's a really, kids already know about orphans. We think like, oh, you don't want to tell kids about orphans, that'll make them sad. But if they've watched any Disney movie, the character always has lost a parent. Like these are not new ideas to them. They understand what that idea is. And it actually is pretty empowering when you give them really practical ideas and ways in which they might be able to like contribute to the story. That's what I like. So here's just a little example. There was a church that was talking to us about some clean water stuff. And so that church did a dirty water, like a dirty lemonade stand where they put a little bit of iced tea powder in water. So the water looked like it was dirty. It certainly was not dirty. And they sold that after church to the congregation, like a lemonade stand. And when someone came to buy some dirty water, they gave them a little document that they had kind of co-created as a class on what the reality is of clean water and what it is that people were doing for it and how the church was involved in it. And it was like do I think that the, $600 that they made that day is going to move the needle in clean water? I hope so. But we have no idea what seeds were planted in the lives of those kids that participated, that God can use them to meet a need around the world. And I think the sweetest payoff is probably yet to be seen for those kids, like all of us. That's how my story started. I went on a mission trip as a high school kid, and I saw a need in Costa Rica, and I came home and organized a poorly organized clothing drive. But at the end of that clothing drive, there was something that lit inside of me that God could use me up somewhere around the world. And I'm grateful that the adults in my life didn't tell me that I wasn't doing it right. There were better ways to do it. I didn't get discouraged. I got encouraged. And still reaping fruit from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was even thinking about whoever it was that said, hey, would you take a group of students on a trip too? Like that's another just little small thing that you look what that led to in the end, which is pretty cool. So I want to throw you a curveball if I can. I don't know why I didn't think about asking you this before. So this is not something we talked about.
Good.
I think I'm hoping the answer isn't, you don't know, which may be the answer, but you have a very distinct communication style. Like when I've seen you speak at conferences or whatever, it's storytelling. It's natural. It's like you just walked up and I don't know. It's amazing. And I know that I am someone who communicates from time to time, doesn't have that. And I think, how do you do that? And a lot of people listening communicate in some form or fashion.
Sure.
What is it? Has that grown in you? Is that something that's always kind of been like that? Is it natural? Have you learned some of it? What is that like for you?
I did learn a lot of it. In real time, I started out giving talks to mission trip guests that would come visit us, 20 and 30 at a time. And what I found was if I could infuse a Bible truth or some fact or principle I wanted them to know inside of a story, they would talk about it when I was done. If I just gave them like, this is what the Bible says, or this is what I need you to know when talking to traumatized children, then, whatever percentage happened to be paying attention to the entire time I was talking is who captured it. But if I could tell it in a story, then even if somebody wasn't listening, they're going to hear it again when people are talking about the story later. And that kind of made sense to me. So, today I teach a little thing that I call Communicator Camp. And in it, I say that if you think of stories like songs, I probably have about 80 songs I know by heart. And then I just put together playlists depending on who my audience is. So, if I'm putting together a playlist, like I know that we met at CPC, probably 75% of that playlist, I've sung that song in another setting, and I already know kind of the timing of it, and I know when it's going to be serious or when it's going to be lighthearted. I kind of already know the rhythm of that song, but I'll add a song or two in that, maybe a quarter of that talk. I'm trying out for the first time, and I'm trusting that the other 75% will buy me enough goodwill to try something new and see, did it sound good? Did it blend well together? And then, and I'm just always trying to learn new songs. I'm always trying to write and learn new songs. So whether that's new Bible stories that I try to incorporate or new things that happen, in my day-to-day life, I'm always thinking like, oh, that would make a good illustration. And then I throw it in somewhere as my 25% and see how it works. Yeah. If it sticks, then it gets added to the playlist. If it's no good, then I say sorry.
Yeah, you cut it out.
Hopefully you remember the rest of it.
I think, like some of it, I think Bob Goff is similar. Like you watch Bob Goff talk, he tells a story and, and then there's a point and then it's like you're in the next story and you're laughing and you're feeling it in the heart. It's this very similar style. And some of it, I look at you two the same in that a lot of it's driven by your life experience. You have these stories that you don't get in 6 months or, you know what I mean? You get it from the lifetime of service and being in that too. But, so it's interesting that you said there's this communicator camp thing. Do you do that mostly for people that are kind of in the back-to-back world? Or have you had people like me that are asking, hey, we're in a church setting. How can we be a better communicator like that? Where did that come from?
I started out, trying to train. I say all the time to our staff, I don't want to be the only person telling stories. You all have your own stories. You're living this exact same life next to me. So if you feel like, I know you have the story, but if you just feel like you don't know quite how to say it, here's some best practices. So like I teach little things like in every story, there's always three things going on. There's the God story and then the my story and then the audience story. You can't ignore any three of those stories or you shortcut the power of it. So I've got to include the audience. If I don't include the audience in some way, then all I do is I'm got a science fair project up there and they think I'm either good or not. I can't cut out the God story. That's the whole reason I'm on a stage. And if I decide to not include myself, a first person story just literally has more power. And so it doesn't make sense to cut out the way that something is impacting me. That's where you build a bridge. When I'm talking to our staff, I'm telling them like in communicator camp that the barriers to adult engagement in mission, any kind of mission, not just overseas orphan mission, but any mission, is that people think like, I don't have anything in common with whoever it is that you're trying to ask me to reach out to, or I don't have anything to offer. And so if we can tell the kinds of stories that create relatability, like what you know and have experienced, so has this population I'm trying to tell you about. And what you have to offer is more than enough. And we often discount or discredit ourselves. Like, I'm not smart like them, funny like them, speak their language, have their skills. So I'm just going to withdraw because I don't have anything to offer. So I talk about like when you're building a talk, think about how you might be able to create an on-ramp for someone that they go, well, if they can do it, I can totally do it. So I started doing it just for our staff so that they would get more and more comfortable telling their own stories to whoever it is that they're in communication with. But I have had other people join in on some of those. I do it digitally, so it's easy. You just sign on and if anybody wants information about that, they can certainly reach out to me too. It's kind of like informal, but I just want the world to be better storytellers because we've got all good stories to tell.
Oh yeah, for sure. Now, and as far as I can tell, I mean, when you're doing a talk, it's not like you have notes. Is that because it's story to story and the stories, I mean, they just stick with you easier. Like I know if I'm communicating, I'm not exactly a scripted person either, but the story is the part where I need it the least, because it's a story. I already know it. Is that the case? You don't really have a lot of notes. You've already got it kind of in your head and story to story and the connecting points. Is that how that works for you?
Yeah, well, two things. I use a Bible that has a magnetic flap on it. So inside of that flap on the front of my Bible that I have on my hand, I have a note card, like a 3x5 note card. And then that note card has the titles of all those stories. So that it functions like an outline for me in case I lose my place or I'm looking at the countdown clock and I realize I was thinking I had 15 more minutes. I only have 5. So I can look kind of quickly at that outline and realize what story I'm going to finish with. But like probably everything in life, when people make something look easy, it's because they've spent a lot of time practicing the content. So, it takes a lot of work to make something look like it was no work at all. So I spend a lot of time, memorizing my talks and, practicing them so that by the time I get on the stage, I have it kind of all in my muscle memory.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I don't know why I didn't think about asking you that earlier, but that's certainly something that's unique. I do think of Bob Goff and you both and you have that style and other people as well, but it's not very common. Like whether somebody uses notes or not, the storytelling style that you have is really powerful. It's really natural. It's one of those things where I think it also helps as an audience, you feel connected pretty early, because you get into that, whatever the story is. And then the whole time I feel like it's just, we're talking over coffee,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If it were Bob, maybe he's yelling at me, but with you, they were just talking over coffee, which is great. So that's helpful. Thanks for giving us some insight into that.
Yeah, I think that I see life in story. So the other tool I have, especially for people who are communicating every week, like to their children's ministry, trying to think of, is I use my phone as a tool. If I'm somewhere, the grocery store, a stoplight, my kid's soccer game, whatever, I see something that I think could be I see something, a moment that creates a reaction in me, fear, anger, happiness, whatever the emotion is. I take a picture of it, even if the picture is not something anybody would ever frame. I take a picture to remind myself that in this moment, I saw this woman in the stands and this made me think of that. Or in this moment, I had this conversation with this person and this is the outcome of it. And then later when I'm putting together, so I speak about 80 times a year. So when I'm putting together a talk and I need some of that new content, I flip through my phone to remind myself of something that happened to me. I think for me, that's easier. It makes it kind of quote unquote forces me to see life in story, but then makes me have fresh content all the time. So I'm not saying like in 1997, this happened to me. Yeah. I can say like Tuesday, this happened and this is how I feel about it.
That's a great idea. So you say you take that picture. Is that, so when you're flipping through, do you I don't know, categorize it, put it in an album or something differently, or you just look through all your pictures and then every now and then there's one of these that you've taken for story purposes?
As a good source of personal discipline, I speak once a month at my local church on a Sunday morning. So that is almost 100% new content. So every month I'm looking at that phone kind of over the last 30 days and thinking, which of these stories can I use on that stage? And, I can make sure it's fresh and new content.
That's good. That's helpful. Yeah, it is one of those things where it looks, you're right, the hard work behind the scenes over the years, and that's what makes it happen. But when you watch from, the audience, it looks like you just showed up there and just started talking about some stories, you didn't have to prepare. Like you could have just came in out of nowhere. Hey, would you mind talking about this? Yeah, sure. So that's great. Thanks for going down that path with me. Totally was unprepared. But I thought, I got to ask that. How can I not ask that? So how about how can people connect with you? If they have any questions, if they want to learn more about Back to Back, if they want to, maybe it's a parent, and we'll put links to the books and some stuff like that. But how can people connect with you?
Yeah, I have a website. I would most drive them to the Back2Back website, which is back2back.org. That's a place where they can see, orphan care blogs and mission trip opportunities and sponsorship availability and kind of some of those big picture things. But then I have a personal blog that has, my speaking schedule and a way that you can directly email me. So that's just my first and last name.com, BethGuckenberger.com. And then of course, I'm on all the social media platforms, so you can find me in most of those.
Cool. Well, Beth, thanks for coming on the podcast, but more thanks for doing this amazing work over 2 decades now. Plus, that's just really cool, and for sharing it with other people, and for speaking and giving us the power through some of those stories that you share. So, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on. God bless you and all the people listening for the work that you do.
Well, I really enjoyed that interview, and I certainly have enjoyed any time I've heard Beth teach. And I'm glad we kind of took a detour there, and I asked that question about how she prepares to teach, because it's something I wanted to know but didn't even think about asking when we were preparing for this interview. I just want to talk about Back2Back Ministries, helping kids understand missions and having a heart for the nations and all that. And she certainly delivered. That was really helpful just to hear about the ministry, how it got started, how it's grown, how we can help kids understand that, and, take that detour into how she teaches and prepares for that. Here's some action items I think of coming out of that interview. One is to check out Back2Back Ministries if you're not familiar with it. A second one, which might be related, is to listen to one of Beth Guckenberger's teachings. I mean, if you teach, if you communicate up front, even if you don't teach, in the Bible in a setting or something like that, but if you communicate to leaders, just watching Beth will teach you how to use story in a powerful way, how she communicates that way, and you heard, how she prepares for that. So I think, checking out Back2Back Ministries is great. Watching Beth teach and taking some notes from that and listening to this podcast and then trying to apply that to how you teach. I know I'm doing that already. I've been doing it since we recorded this interview. I've been thinking about how can I teach more in kind of a storytelling method, especially in a way that's not as tied to notes. And like she talked about, capturing those stories as much as you can. I've been doing that here recently, actually, because I'll be teaching at a church about the next generation and talking about phase content from Orange and really just giving parents and everybody else in the church some insight into that and, getting them fired up about the next generation and serving them well within the church as parents, making the most of the time we have. And so I've been thinking about that talk for a while. And because we recorded this interview before then, I've been thinking the way Beth does about, saving stories and anything I see that might fit, collecting that and planning to use that in that talk. So I hope that was helpful to you. I enjoyed the conversation for sure. Again, you can get the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 140. And if you're interested in training your volunteers online, you won't find a better platform than Trained Up. Again, you can check that out at ministryboost.org/trained up and use the code BOOST10 for 10% off for life. Thanks for listening. Hope it was helpful, and I'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.